Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I apologize for the late start. For some reason, OBS kicked me out of my login, so I just had to quickly log back into the account so I could just start the stream. I don't know why it did that, but that was really unfortunate for me. But regardless, the play-in games, they happened last night, so obviously the first two segments are going to be talking about each game individually, what I thought about it, and what each team is looking forward to in the as if they move on, if they get eliminated, this, that, and the other. So the first one is going to be about the Lakers game, obviously, and because that game happened first. And then the next segment is going to be the Kings game going up against the Warriors because that game happened second. And then in the third segment, we are going to do a preview of the Eastern Conference play-in games because those happen tonight at, I believe, 7:30 again, similar to how they happened yesterday night at 7:30 as well. We also have a very special fourth segment that I reveal at the end of the third segment, so stay tuned for that. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please remember to use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment to get your comments recognized. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. GSMCPodcast.net. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about the Lakers beating the Pelicans in the play-in matchup. So going into the game, I wasn't really expecting the Lakers to actually try and win, but it's a good thing that they did. And they ended up playing like 100%, like how they usually would when going up against a team like that. And the game was very, very interesting because it started out with the Pelicans winning by 10 plus. Then the Lakers started to rally and they were up by 20 at one point. Then out of nowhere, the Pelicans just decided to make a comeback behind Zion Williamson's ridiculous 40 points. Like, Zion went off against the Lakers. And it's almost unfortunate how the game ended, if you're a Pelicans fan, because Zion, after dropping 40 and 11, ended up needing to go to the locker room in the final minutes of the game, thus preventing him from being able to help his team seal that comeback win for the Pelicans. And obviously, as a Laker fan, I'm like, thank the Lord, because I won't even lie to you. Well, not really a Laker fan. I'm more like a LeBron fan. Like, as a LeBron fan, thank the Lord that ended up happening. Unfortunate as it is, like, I'm not saying that I'm happy that he's injured. I'm just saying that it was fortunate for them because if Zion were to play in those final minutes, maybe the results of this game would have been a little bit different. But LeBron, he dropped 23. He led his team in scoring, but he did not have a very good night in terms of efficiency. He was one rebound and one assist away from triple-double, but he shot 6 of 20 from the field and 1 for 5 from 3, which is a little bit underwhelming for LeBron. I understand that he is the oldest player in the NBA, but that is, like, again, it's really underwhelming how inefficient he was in this play-in matchup. He's usually He's usually much more efficient in the games that really matter, and he usually plays a lot better in crunch time situations, but he didn't really do that in this game. So the door was wide open for the Pelicans to seal that comeback win, but thankfully, for the first time in like what feels like forever, the Lakers teammates and LeBron's teammates actually showed up. D'Angelo Russell ended the game with 21 points, 7 of 14 from the field. Very, very efficient from him. And Anthony Davis ended the game 6 of 16, a little bit less efficient, but he shot 8 of 10 from the line and also made both of the game-sealing free throws against his former team. So, let's see, just looking at the rest of the scorers, Austin Reeves ended the game with 16 points, 5 for 11. Roy Hachimura ended the game 5 of 6 for 13 points. And that was basically it in terms of all the important scoring. One thing that I think should be addressed was how they're sort of underutilizing Spencer Dinwiddie. I mean, he only played 5 minutes in this game for some reason, but in those 5 minutes, he ended up going 0 for 3 from the field. So it might have been for the best that he wasn't playing that much, but as a Nets fan and seeing this former Nets player score significantly less than what he needed to score on the Brooklyn Nets is a little bit disappointing, because how do you go from a 20-point per game scorer to just barely being able to drop 2 points? It's a little bit concerning for the Lakers. And it was hyped up that this move in free agency, not in free agency, but this signing after a few in the middle of the regular season was oh, this is a good thing, he's a great scorer, but he's not been providing it as much. Now, on the Pelicans side, while LeBron didn't really play well, I can't really say that the rest of the other players on the Pelicans played well either. CJ McCollum ended the game with only 9 points. And let's see, he shot, I believe it was, 1 for 9 from the field and 1 for 9 from 3 and 4 for 15 from the field. Jonas Valanciunas also didn't play well in this matchup, scoring only 4 points and 1 for 7 from the field. Brandon Ingram also didn't play well in this matchup, scoring just 11 points and 4 of 12 from the field. And I said previously on the podcast that this game was going to be determined on how good Brandon Ingram was going to play. And for the most part, that's somewhat held up, because if Brandon Ingram would have shot the ball just a little bit better, they would have been in a better position to win. So, obviously, this loss for the Pelicans, it's a little bit disappointing, but it's not like their season is over, because they still have a chance to beat the Kings in the next matchup, so that way they could still keep their playoff hopes alive and actually play a much easier opponent in OKC as the 8th seed, but and OKC is the 1st seed. But after the game, with Zion Williamson going down with an injury, now their path to the playoffs is a little bit more uncertain. That is a huge wild card factor to take into account with this game. The fact that Zion had to leave the game due to an apparent injury. Now, maybe he gets better, maybe he doesn't, but it's still very concerning if you are a Pelicans fan going into this next game against the Sacramento Kings, especially the Kings, because they have the matchups perfect to be able to beat you if you're the Pelicans. Now, since the Lakers won, they don't have to play another play-in game. They are going to match up against the Denver Nuggets in the first round. And somebody told me that, it's better to get the Denver Nuggets out of the way now than to meet them later in the postseason when they have momentum. And that makes a lot of sense. However, I was sort of saying to avoid them entirely in the hopes that some other team would beat them, and then they'd be able to beat that team that beat them. Similar to how in 2020 the Lakers didn't end up playing the Clippers because the Nuggets ended up beating the Clippers in the second round, and thus allowing them to sort of play a little bit of an easier matchup. At the time, it was considered an easier matchup than playing the Clippers, because back then, the Battle of LA, that was supposed to be this big epic thing that was going to happen in the playoffs, yet we never ever have gotten it. Literally, the hype on the Battle of LA, that was probably the most hyped up thing that the NBA has done, and it flopped horrendously. Like, it flopped even more than the hype was, if that makes sense. Because, like, we've never seen the Clippers and the Lakers match up against each other in the playoffs, in the play-in, in any type of postseason matchup. We have not seen it since Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have have joined the Clippers. And it's really underwhelming. Like, I mean, the Battle of LA, that's a really big deal. And it would have definitely attracted a lot of attention had that been the Western Conference Finals matchup at the time. But regardless, we don't get a Battle of LA. We get a rematch between the Western Conference Finals. So whoever wins this matchup, I believe, has the best chance of making the Western Conference Finals. So if the Lakers win, I think they're going to go all the way to the Western Conference Finals at least. The Nuggets win, they're also going to go all the way to the Western Conference Finals at least. So it's going to be a very highly anticipated game, watching them both match up against each other again, given how the Nuggets have swept them in the previous year. Maybe the Lakers can tack on one game, but they are ready, at least according to Darvin Ham. Darvin Ham, in the locker room, he said, now our record is 0-0, and we want all the smoke. So hopefully the Lakers are better prepared for the matchup against Jokic and Jamal Murray. I will say, however, like that last matchup that they played against Jokic and Murray and the Nuggets, that was really ridiculous because there were times where the Lakers played some of the best defense imaginable, but Jokic just threw up the ball and it went in, or Jamal Murray would throw up the ball and it went in. And it's just like you can't really ask for anything more from the Lakers because they were making some of the craziest, most difficult shots that you could ever imagine. Like, think of Kobe Bryant difficult type shots. And Kobe shot every single kind of fadeaway you could think of in the book. He shot it double clutch fadeaway. He shot a regular fadeaway. He shot a fadeaway in front of two people. He shot a fadeaway over a center. He shot a fadeaway. He was the best difficult shots maker that the NBA has ever seen. And that was literally what Jokic and Jamal Murray were doing in that entire matchup. So are they going to be lucky again and hit all of those shots? Because it did seem like those shots were incredibly lucky because they were just throwing the ball up at that point. Like, it looked like they were just throwing the ball up, praying to God that it would go in, and it would go in. And it's really like those kind of shots demoralize a team and could prevent them from having the confidence to make a run or to make the series a bit more competitive. Because when you're hitting those type of shots, it's like, what do you do? Like, you're playing the proper defense, you're playing the right defense that you can, but it ultimately ends up with the other team still scoring. So it's like, Jesus, like, what? At least that's sort of the feeling that I got when I saw Jokic throw the ball up, because it's like, how on earth is he hitting this ridiculous shot? Like, it was over Anthony Davis's face, fading away, like turning around, and it was ridiculous, the shots that they were making. But now for the Pelicans, like I mentioned previously, they still have a shot of making it to the playoffs, but their chances are sort of a little bit lower because Zion Williamson's not going to be playing in this matchup, and it's going to be down to the teammates. It's going to be down to CJ McCollum, and it's going to be down to Brandon Ingram, because they definitely can beat the Kings. Like, if all those players that I mentioned played well, they definitely can beat the Kings. But with that, that's basically all I wanted to cover for this segment, and that's really all that you guys needed to know and to look forward to in this next matchup. So we are out of time for the first segment, and I will go ahead and pivot to the second segment where I talk about the Warriors matching up against the Kings right after this break, which is going to be a little bit of a longer than normal break because I unfortunately do have to use the bathroom. So I will be right back with you guys after this break.
feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we're going to be talking about the Warriors and their matchup against the Kings. And we're just going to go straight ahead into that. But before I do that, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And let's just go right ahead into the next segment, which is going to be about the Warriors facing the Kings. Now, previously in the last segment, I was a little bit uncertain of how the game would go because I favored the Kings in this matchup. However, Golden State has a history of beating the Kings, and Steph Curry usually plays well against the Kings. But in this game, the Kings ended up winning in a blowout win at home, 118-94. Light the beam, as they all say, and as everyone in the attendance was chanting, light the beam, after they ended up winning in this blowout. So, a little bit of an underwhelming performance from Curry. I don't blame him for the loss in this game. However, I did expect him to play a little bit better and to score a few more points than he did. I thought he was going to end the game with at least 35, but he ended the game with 22 points, 8 of 16 from the field. Again, not bad, just not the amount of points and production that I thought he was going to give in this game. And even with LeBron playing really, really bad, he still ended up finishing the game with more points than Steph Curry. So that's just another win for LeBron. And the fact that LeBron is still in the playoffs and the Warriors dynasty is kind of in limbo right now and still wondering whether or not they're going to be able to compete again like they've done previous years is nothing short of amazing from LeBron. But I keep making this thing about LeBron. But regardless, the Kings just played better in this matchup. There's really nothing else that needs to be said other than the fact that they just played better. And some of the Warriors players, they were a little bit lackluster in this game, and they did not provide Curry with the help that he needed and that he's used to when playing in these ridiculous playoff games. Like, playing in these playoff games, Curry, like, almost 9 times out of 10, he always has help from another star in production, and he just didn't get that in this game. So Kuminga ended the game with 16 points, 6 of 15 from the field, and the most jarring of all the performances was Klay Thompson. He ended the game going 0 for 10 from the field, 0 for 6 from 3, and couldn't get a single point. Now, this is obviously, like, if you're a Warriors fan, this was really, really bad. If you're a bettor and you went and you took the over on Klay Thompson, this is also really, really bad, because usually we're accustomed to Klay Thompson being able to hit the important threes when the team really needs it. And the fact that they didn't have that in this game definitely hindered their performance and ultimately resulted in the Kings blowing them out. So the big question around the Warriors is if the dynasty is over. Like, is it time to break up the big three of Steph, Klay, and Draymond? That is the main topic of conversation. Steve Kerr said that he spoke for everyone when they say that the Warriors wanted him back, because even though, like, he is, which is a problem. Like, that's going to be a problem when looking at when talking about contract negotiations, because how much money are the Warriors willing to give Klay Thompson? That is going to be the ultimate question that none of us really know at the moment. He is going to be an unrestricted free agent going into free agency this summer, and the really big question is if the Golden State Warriors are going to pay him. And after this kind of performance, it might discourage them from wanting to pay him the money that he feels that he's owed, because given the fact that he's won 4 rings, given the fact that he's been a very integral piece to the Warriors and their success, it only makes sense that the Warriors would give him the amount of money that he wants, because that would just be doing right by him. But I don't really think that's going to happen. What I think is going to happen is that they suggest that he takes a pay cut, thus allowing them to increase their cap space and being able to bring in multiple other players and be able to reload that way. It's going to be a problem and it's going to be difficult, but I really put nothing past that front office in terms of lineup management, recruiting, and things of that nature. I never put it past them, because it seems that every single time I think that the Warriors are just done, they end up coming back and they end up winning again. Similar to how they lost in the play-in before, and then the next year they went on and won a championship. Now, is that going to happen again? Not very likely. However, when you do have a lineup that contains Steph Curry, and Steph Curry is still playing his best basketball, anything is possible with this team. So anything is possible with a healthy Curry, and a Curry that's playing the same way that he's been playing all season. So it's really tough question to ask right now, and we're just going to have to see how free agency unfolds. Now, as for the Kings and their respective performances, Keegan Murray went off in this game, getting 32 points and 9 rebounds on 10 for 20 from the field. De'Aaron Fox also played relatively well. 24 points, was the second leading scorer for the Kings, even though he ended up taking more shots than he did scoring points, 11 for 25 from the field. It was still a pretty good performance, considering the fact that they ended up coming out with the win. Now, Sabonis, he ended the game going with 16 points, 12 rebounds, and 7 assists, shooting 7 of 14 from the field, and Harrison Barnes ended the game with 17 points, 5 for 11 from the field. And it's honestly pretty poetic how Harrison Barnes ended up playing really, really well against the Warriors, his former team, and ended up shutting them down, effectively putting an end to the Warriors dynasty for now, because, again, we have no idea how things are going to play out in the offseason or how things are going to play out in free agency. So, for now, the Warriors dynasty is over, and the Kings move on to play the Pelicans in their next matchup as they fight for the 8th seed. Now, they somewhat have an advantage when going into this matchup, because the Pelicans are most likely going to be without Zion Williamson. And when you take that into account, that is a huge factor of the game. Zion is extremely valuable to the Pelicans, and the impact that he showed against the Warriors cannot be denied. And his 40 points and 11 rebound game was nothing short of amazing. And the fact that the Pelicans won't have that going into this matchup against the Kings is a serious problem. I mentioned previously in other podcasts how the Kings, the matchups that they had, they were really good against the Pelicans, but the Pelicans, they also had relatively good matchups with Zion going head-to-head against Sabonis. Like, that is just a good matchup. Now that they don't have Zion, I wonder who is going to really be able to stop Sabonis or to slow down Sabonis or match his production. And it's going to be a lot more pressure on CJ McCollum to perform against the Kings and Brandon Ingram to also perform against the Kings. And who do I think would win in that matchup? I think the Kings have the best shot in winning. Considering how they won this game in a blowout, they did play at home, which ultimately gives them an advantage. However, they blew out the Warriors, and the Warriors, like, when they're on, they're on. They just weren't on in this game. So, assuming that the Pelicans play how they played against the Lakers, I don't really see the Kings losing a game against that team, especially without Zion, because Zion, again, like I said, very integral piece to this team, and now they probably won't even have that. And not only that, I also think that the Kings, they have the similar playoff experience as the Thunder. And another thing going into this previous game, they weren't really favored to beat the Warriors, and they weren't really, it was sort of a hump that they needed to get over, if that makes sense. And so there might have been a little bit more emotion in this game. Like, they might have taken it personally, like how I said previously. And this was the largest win against the Warriors since February 2006 for the Kings, with where they ended up beating them by 25 points. So obviously, there was some sort of emotion in this game, and it was they finally got over the hump and beating the Warriors after their embarrassing loss at home in the playoffs of last year. So it's a little bit odd not seeing Curry in the playoffs again, but regardless, they ended up getting the win, and do they have enough left in the tank to be able to win against the Pelicans is going to be the ultimate question. Now, I really genuinely think that the Kings, they have the best chances of winning in this matchup. And assuming that CJ doesn't really play that well, even more so of a chance. Now, they will play the Thunder. Now, between the two teams, like the Pelicans and the Kings, I think the Kings have a better chance in beating the Thunder, but I don't think that the Thunder are going to lose to either of those teams, simply because their playoff experience is roughly the same. And therefore, it's really going to be dependent on how the Thunder are able to handle the pressure of the playoffs, because being the youngest team in the NBA to ever make the 1 seed and make the playoffs, it's really there's obviously going to be a lot of nerves that some of these players won't know how to handle, because they've never been in that kind of situation before. Now, obviously, they could handle it great in their first playoff matchup, and I think the fact that they don't have to play the Lakers or the Warriors just ultimately boosts their confidence and will allow the Thunder to play very well in the postseason, matched up against either of those teams. So I think after this play-in game, their postseason run ends. Regardless of which team makes it out, I think their postseason run ends in the first round, which is a little bit unfortunate because they worked so hard to finally get over that hump, only to lose in the first round. But I really don't see the Thunder losing to either of these teams. I thought the Warriors and the Lakers had a bit of a better chance. Specifically, the Lakers had a much better chance of beating the Thunder in the first round due to all their experience and playoff experience. But now that that's not happening, I kind of see the Thunder being able to make it past the first round and being able to win a playoff series, whereas previously I was unsure if they were going to win a playoff series. So that's basically all the matchups that happen in the Western Conference. So now we're just waiting on the Kings to play, and we're also waiting on the Eastern Conference, which starts tonight. And speaking of which, let me just see. Yeah, I feel like we can go right ahead and go into the third segment where I talk about the next play-in matchups. And the next play-in matchups are going to be the Eastern Conference playoff matchups. And I'll give my opinions on like what teams I think are going to make it out, what to expect from them, things of that nature. So I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be looking at the matchups that are going to be happening tonight for the play-in tournament. And these are the Eastern Conference matchups. I haven't talked about them yet, and they actually start at 7 o'clock. So forgive me for saying that they start at 7:30. They actually start a lot earlier than that. And the first matchup, we're just going to go right ahead and dive right into these matchups. So the first matchup is going to be the Heat against the Sixers. And this is going to be a really, really interesting game because it's all going to be dependent on whether or not Joel Embiid can play well against Bam Adebayo and how well the Sixers are going to be able to handle that pressure. So I think that between the two teams, I think the Miami Heat have the better chance of winning against the 76ers simply because of matchups, I guess you could say. I think Bam Adebayo, while he is much shorter than Joel Embiid, should be able to put up a relatively good fight against him in this play-in tournament. And usually, like when the playoffs roll around, the refs are a little bit more lackluster when sending people to the line. You wouldn't be able to tell that if you watched the Lakers game and you watched the free throw difference between the Lakers and the Kings. Not the Kings, the Pelicans, excuse me. But going into this matchup, and usually like going into the playoffs, like I genuinely, my faith in Embiid is very, very low. Like I genuinely do not think that Joel Embiid is going to be able to beat the Miami Heat because the Heat have been able to overcome ridiculous amounts of pressure to ultimately grant themselves a deep playoff run. And even though they're a relatively low seed, they always seem to turn it on in the playoffs as a team. Not just Jimmy Butler, as a team. They always seem to turn it up when they really need it. And I don't really think, assuming Jimmy Butler goes off, I don't really think the Sixers have a matchup good enough to stop him from being able to go off. And the fact that this isn't really the first time that the Miami Heat have been in this situation, I think they're going to be able to handle the pressure a little bit more because this is essentially an elimination game. So I really feel like they're able to handle the pressure a little bit more than the Sixers would be able to handle this kind of pressure. Now, this is going to be the first time that Tyrese Maxey is sort of expected to have very good and dominant production in the postseason. Before, previously, it was all on James Harden and Joel Embiid to have that kind of production. And now it's Tyrese Maxey's turn, along with Joel Embiid's turn, yet again, to sort of perform. And given how this is really the first time that he's averaged 25 points, and this will be the first time that he's going to be the second option in a playoff game, we're going to have to look and see how well he plays and how he handles the pressure. Because quite frankly, I'm not entirely sure if Maxey will be able to handle the pressure playing in the postseason. Now, for Joel Embiid, I'm really not that confident with Joel Embiid. He hasn't made it out of the second round at all in his entire career, and almost every single time he gets injured in the postseason, and he also ends up not playing well in the postseason or not playing good enough for the team to win. Similar to how in the last year's matchup when they matched up against the Celtics, he played really, really bad in the elimination game, along with James Harden, simply because in that entire game, he was just flopping and ref baiting and trying to get the ref to send him to the line. And you can't do that in the postseason. You have to look to score. And the fact that he just doesn't look to score and just looks to get fouled, I think it's going to hurt the team more than it's going to help the team in the postseason and in this play-in matchup. And again, the Heat, they have a much better roster overall, and they have much more options. If Jimmy Butler is unable to score, they have Tyler Hero to score. If Bam Adebayo isn't able to score, they have Terry Rozier. They have all these other players. They have Gabe Vincent. They have all these players that just play better in the postseason, and they always sort of step up. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat end up winning this game and move on to play the Knicks in the first round, which is going to be a Eastern Conference semifinals matchup. But this time, the Knicks are going to be healthy, and they're actually going to have a lot more players to sort of help Jalen Brunson in the postseason. So I really think it's going to be a different story this time in the postseason, and we might see the Miami Heat make a deep run. We might not, but I don't really see that same thing happening for the Sixers. So my faith on the Sixers is relatively low. And regardless whether they win or they lose and they still make the playoffs, I genuinely do not think they have what it takes to make it past the first round. If they lose this matchup, if the Sixers lose this matchup and they have to go down to the 8th seed, I think that's it for them. I genuinely think that is the death sentence, and I think the Celtics are going to sweep them. Because the Celtics, they're just the better team compared to the Sixers, and the Celtics have a history of dominating the Sixers several years. For several years, they've had a history of beating the Sixers. And given how Joel Embiid plays in the postseason, I genuinely do not think that they'll have a chance to beat this high-powered Boston Celtics team, especially having Kristaps Porzingis at the 5, being a very tall center, 7'3", and being able to sort of disrupt Joel Embiid as he plays. So I think the Sixers' road ends here. I've said this previously, like their best bet is to just stay alive for the playoffs and pray to God that Joel Embiid gets better. But now that they're in the play-in, I genuinely do not think that they have a shot, because they go up against teams that are just much better than them as the 1 seed and the 2 seed. So I have the Heat winning this game, and the Sixers would have to play between either the Hawks or the Bulls. Now, this matchup is going to be a little bit closer than the previous matchup. So moving on to the Hawks versus the Bulls, they play at home, and they also play with relatively minimal play-in experience, I guess you could say. And they usually don't really have much success in the play-in. And the Hawks, however, they do have success in the play-in, with Trae Young playing relatively well and being able to lead his team to wins in these important games. So, but I don't see either of these teams making it out of the play-in. I genuinely think that both of these teams are done after this first game. Like, depending on who wins, they'll move on to play either the Sixers or the Heat, and I think that's it for them. So, not really much that needs to be, like, looking forward to on these two teams. I'm just looking for a good game, honestly. However, there is a wild card. And you guys are going to be a little bit surprised with this wild card, maybe not, but DeMar DeRozan's daughter. Now, if you guys remember from the last year's play-in tournament, DeAr DeRozan, I believe that's how you pronounce her name. Forgive me if I botched it, but she held, and I say she held because she held the Raptors to shooting like 58% from the free throw line or something like that. They shot really bad from the line as a team, and the reason being, like, well, at least the media gives it, like, the reason being, like, DeRozan's daughter. If you watch that game and you listen to that game, you can hear, like, every single time that the Raptors were at the line, she was screaming. Like, she was straight screaming to the top of her lungs, and ultimately, they ended up missing a lot of those free throws. Like, I don't know what it was, but they missed a lot more free throws than they usually do. And it was so bad that she even got death threats from these Raptors fans. Like, the fact that they're threatening a toddler because their team couldn't hit free throws is insane. And that was the biggest story of that play-in matchup. The fact that she was screaming so loud and the team was shooting free throws really bad, and that ultimately gave them the edge to win the game in the end. And so the fact that they play at home with DeRozan's daughter probably going to be in the front section is going to be interesting, because I guarantee you she is going to be screaming every single time that team is at the line. And it's probably going to be the biggest story of this play-in matchup. But the matchup itself, I think that the Hawks have a better chance of winning than the Miami Heat due to their experience in the postseason and due to how well Trae Young usually plays in front of the away crowd. Now, I'm speaking as someone who's relative to, like, the metropolitan area of New Jersey and New York. That man played in front of the Garden, in front of a hostile crowd, and completely shut them down. Like, he made all of New York quiet, and he made all of New York hate him, essentially. Like, there's not a single fan in New York that likes Trae Young whatsoever. And the fact that he can play in the Garden like that makes me think that, like, okay, if he can play in the Garden with all that hostility and still play well, he can play in front of any kind of home crowd in the postseason when it really matters and still play well. So I don't really think that being away is going to affect this Hawks team. However, only time will tell. And there's no really, like, guarantee. There's no real way to, like, know for sure that which team is going to win, especially with this matchups, because I genuinely do not know. And regardless, no matter which team makes it out, I think their playoff journey just ends right there, because the Heat and the Sixers, they have, like, this right now, the Heat, they have 10 more wins than the Hawks, and they have 7 more wins against 6-7 more wins against the Bulls. And the Sixers, they also have 10 plus games over the Hawks. They have 11 more wins than the Hawks do, and they also have 8 more wins than the Bulls do. So the gap between records in the Eastern Conference, between, like, from the 7th and the 8th seed to the 9th and 10th seed, is much greater than the gap between, like, the play-in teams in the Western Conference. So with that in mind, I don't think that either of those teams really have what it takes to make it past either of those teams. And this is where the play-in tournament sort of comes into question, because it makes sense to do it on the Western Conference, but on the Eastern Conference, when the game difference is literally 10, it doesn't really make that much sense, at least to me. Like, if I was Adam Silver and if I was the commissioner, I would honestly just disqualify both the Hawks and the Bulls from the play-in entirely and just focus on the Heat against the Sixers, because the gap between those two teams in the 9th and 10th seed, they shouldn't even make the playoffs. They genuinely, like, if this was previous years before the play-in, there would be no debate on if they deserve to make the playoffs. There just wouldn't, because of the game difference. And I genuinely don't think that the play-in game between the Hawks and the Bulls really matters that much. So if I was the commissioner, I would have honestly just canceled this game and just the Heat and the Sixers play. And depending on who wins, holds the 7th seed, and whoever loses holds the 8th seed. Because those two teams, they deserve to be in the playoffs far more than the Bulls and the Hawks. And I just don't think there's really a point in playing those games. Now, this could ultimately fall flat on my face if the Hawks or the Bulls end up beating either the Sixers or the Heat, depending on who loses. And that could obviously happen. That could, because a one-game series, like, anything can happen in a one-game series. But that's exactly why I don't think that the 9 and 10 seed in the Eastern Conference should be playing this time, because anything can happen, and they can ultimately just have two really good games in the play-in tournament, which thus propels them into the playoffs. And I don't really think that's fair to put either of those teams in the playoffs over the Sixers and the Heat, who have roughly 10 more wins or like 8 more wins than the Hawks and the Bulls. Because the reason why the play-in tournament was even established in the first place was because the seedings in the Western Conference, and arguably in the Eastern Conference at times, they're usually really, really close. Like, they're very close, and it's usually down to tiebreakers to who makes it to the playoffs. And the fact that it's really, really close, it's sort of unfair to the teams that have the same record, and it's like, give them a chance. Like, that's sort of what the play-in tournament, that's how I see the play-in tournament and why it was implemented into the NBA. But now that now that the game difference is like 10, there's really no need to even have a play-in tournament for the Eastern Conference. But again, that would also just be unfair for to allow the West to play a play-in tournament, but not allow the East to play a play-in tournament. So they can't really do that, even though I genuinely think that they should. But these matchups, they're going to be highly anticipated, and specifically the first matchup, I'm just curious to see who wins between the Bulls and the Hawks. It's just for curiosity. I genuinely do not think that they'll make it out of the into the playoffs, either of those teams, if they match up against either the Heat or the Sixers. I genuinely don't. But it's really to look forward to in the playoffs. It's really going to be which team is going to play the Boston Celtics in the first round. And if the Heat lose and they end up playing for the 8th seed and play against the Celtics, I'm not entirely sure who's going to win that series, because the Miami Heat, they lost to the Celtics before, then they beat them again. So I'm not entirely sure which team is going to win that matchup, because of how good the Heat are in the postseason and just their tendency of being able to beat these really, really good teams, because this wouldn't be the first time that they were an 8th seed and they beat the 1 seed. And this also wouldn't be the first time that the Celtics disappoint everyone in the postseason. So that series will be very, very competitive. That would be a really, really good first round. But if the Sixers play them, I genuinely think the Celtics can easily beat the Sixers. So if you're looking for a good first round matchup, the Miami Heat against the Celtics would be really, really good. And so far, the only really good matchups in the Eastern Conference right now in the first round that are confirmed are the Bucks going up against the Pacers. And even then, now I don't think that's really going to be much of a series because Giannis is supposedly going to be hurt for the remainder of for some part of the postseason. And that's going to be something that the team, that is really going to be a struggle with the Bucks, the fact that they won't have Giannis for some of these games. And it's very, very concerning. But with that, we are out of time for the third segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the special fourth segment where I reveal the NBA's punishment on Jontay Porter. Woj recently tweeted this out, so I'm just going to briefly talk about that after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. This segment is going to be a little bit shorter than the last few segments simply because there's not really much that needs to be elaborated. So, Woj recently gave us an update on the Jontay Porter situation. If you guys don't remember, it was speculated that Jontay Porter was involved in helping out sports gambling. And so the report is, I'm just pulling it up right now, is that, so the NBA has banned him for life. He is not going to be an NBA player anymore, unfortunately for him. But the league statement is, the league's investigation found that prior to the Raptors' March 20 game, Porter disclosed confidential information about his own health status to an individual he knew to be an NBA bettor. Another individual with whom Porter associated and knew to be an NBA bettor subsequently placed an $80,000 parlay proposition bet with an online sports book to win $1.1 million, wagering that Porter would underperform in the March 20 game. So, with that report in mind, I previously said I think it's a little bit harsh to ban someone for life, and especially given how they punish other NBA players who genuinely commit crimes in life. And the fact that they sort of ban him for life for gambling is much more of an ethical problem rather than it is a league problem. Because I genuinely think he should be banned from the NBA entirely, because doing that is just inexcusable. I mean, disclosing that kind of information, regardless whether it's harmful, whether it hurts anyone or not, it's cheating. And I just don't like cheaters in any of these sports league. I genuinely don't. It's part of the reason why I dislike Tom Brady in football, because there was rumors that he was cheating. And that's only part of the reason, by the way. But cheaters, they belong, there's no place for cheaters in any kind of league. So I think that this ban for life is definitely suitable for someone who disclosed this kind of information. But it's much more of an ethical problem, because there are some players in the NBA who have genuinely committed heinous crimes, and they're still playing in the NBA with no punishment whatsoever. And I really don't like saying their names, because it's just giving them more traction. But Bridges, he was arrested for assaulting his girl, his wife, whatever you want to call it. But he was arrested for assault. Yet here he is still playing in the NBA and still making enough money as if, not enough, a lot of money, as if none of it ever happened. Then there's also Giddey on the Thunder and his situation with his allegation where he was allegedly in a relationship with a minor, allegedly. and the NBA didn't really do anything about it. And it's much more of an ethical problem. Karl Malone. It's very, very well known that Karl Malone impregnated a 13-year-old when he was in college, and the NBA and the fans, they're not as nice with Karl Malone, but the NBA still isn't afraid to sort of honor him and what he's done to the league. And Utah Jazz fans, they genuinely do not really care. But it's these kind of players that are still making money when they commit these kinds of crimes, and it's an ethical problem, because it's how are you going to ban someone for life for gambling and sports betting, but you don't ban someone who commits a crime from your league? Because neither of those types of players, in my opinion, belong in the league whatsoever. If you hurt someone, if you allegedly hurt someone, and if it's there's just no place in that league. And I do not think, because if you genuinely don't hurt someone, there wouldn't be allegations around you hurting someone. That's how I view it. Me personally, if there's an allegation in the air, where did it come from? It had to have come from somewhere. That's my personal take on it. And I don't think that people like that have a place in any kind of sports league, because that's just giving them popularity. Wow, you're still giving the attention to someone who allegedly did this, allegedly did that. Even if it's allegedly, you don't know for sure. And so, obviously, there's the thought of, what if they did do it? And then there's the thought of what if they didn't do it? So I sort of understand, why. But again, it's really, just an ethical problem. And it's really, really difficult to talk about, because it's you're sort of uncertain. And it's it's much easier to give a lifetime ban for someone who's gambling, because it's much more certain whether or not they were involved with it or not, as opposed to these kinds of acts that a lot of these players do. And it's really, really, it's concerning to me. I agree with the ban, but if you're going to do this, I feel like you should ban a lot of other players for committing acts that are against the law. Whether allegedly committing acts against the law, excuse me. So that's basically, all I really have to say on this segment, and about Jontay Porter and his little situation, because it's really unfortunate for him. But again, he really shouldn't have disclosed this kind of information, whatsoever. Definitely should not have disclosed this information. But that's basically it for the fourth segment. Again, I said it was going to be a relatively shorter fourth segment, because there's not really much that needs to be said about this. Because, he was banned for life, period, done, end of story. They figured out exactly what he was doing, and there's just no place for that in this league. So that's going to be it for the fourth segment, and therefore that is going to be the end of the show. So thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And let me know what you guys think about this situation in the comments. Do you agree that he should be banned for life, or do you think that it should have been just a year ban or a 2-year ban or an indefinite ban? But I'm really curious as to see what you guys have to say. So before I end off the segment, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment to get your comments recognized. The link is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And that will be it for the show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee